Well, welcome to the Canby Planning Commission meeting Monday, February 25th, 2019. Would you please stand for the invocation and pledge? Good Lord, thank you for allowing us all to be here tonight, and these people in the public that will participate, the applicants, and our staff and commissioners that make this all work. Bless us all and help us all to get home safely. I ask these things in God's name, amen. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Is there any citizens' input on non-agenda items tonight? No input. All right, we don't have minutes available tonight, so we will pass on the approval of those minutes. Is there any new business?
None on the agenda.
Okay. We're going to have a public hearing tonight. To testify, please fill out a testimony, comment card, and give to the recording secretary. Tonight, we're going to consider a request from Icon Construction to subdivide a 9.14 acre site into a 31 lot subdivision intended for detached single-family homes located on the west side of North Pine Street between Northeast 15th and Northeast 16th Avenues. It's sub UB 18-06 Hamilton Acres. This is continued to a date certain from February 11th, 2019. This is a quasi-judicial public hearing. The matter presently before the hearing body requires a public hearing. All interested persons in attendance shall be heard on the matter. If you wish to testify on this matter, please be prepared to step forward to the microphone at the appropriate time. State your name, mailing address, and interest in the matter. For those people other than the applicants that are interested in testifying as either proponents or opponents, please sign in on the sheet or speak up when we call for testimony. For longer presentations, proponents and opponents may buy time from one another. In so doing, those in favor or opposed may allocate their time to a spokesperson who will represent the entire group. You may be limited by time for your presentation. Generally, the applicant will have a total of 15 minutes to speak. The proponents will be given 5 minutes each. The opponents will be given 5 minutes each, and those thought to be neutral on the matter will be given 5 minutes each. The applicant will then have 10 minutes for rebuttal. All questions must be directed through the chair. Any evidence to be considered must be submitted to the hearing body for public access and to become a part of the record. All written testimony received both for and against prior to the hearing shall be summarized by staff and presented briefly to the hearing body during the staff report. Testimony and evidence must be directed toward the applicable review criteria contained as indicated in the staff report. The comprehensive plan or the applicable land use regulations which the person believes to apply to the decision. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the decision maker and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue. May preclude appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. Failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to the proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the local government to respond to the issue may preclude any action for damages in circuit court. Everyone present is encouraged to testify, even if it is only to concur with previous testimony. At this time, I would ask that any member of the hearing body who has a conflict of interest to please indicate the nature and extent of the conflict and whether you intend to participate or abstain from hearing the present matter.
I don't have a conflict of interest. I do want to put on the record I had a conversation with a individual that lives across the street from the development. He had some concerns about the condition of the road, and I don't believe it would preclude my participation tonight, so I'm happy to answer any questions about that.
Okay. Any questions, guys? No? Okay. Also, if any member of the hearing body has had any ex parte contact with anyone prior to this hearing, including a visit to the site, please declare the nature and extent of such contact at this time. Like you've already declared that.
I guess that would be, I drive by it every day because I live right next door to it, so.
Does any member of the audience have any questions for any commissioner regarding conflict of interest or ex parte contact? No? The public hearing will be conducted as follows. First, a staff report, questions, if any, by the hearing body or of staff. Open public hearing for testimony. Applicant, not more than 15 minutes. Proponents, not more than 5 minutes each. And opponents, not more than 5 minutes each. Neutral, not more than 5 minutes. Rebuttal by the applicant, not more than 10 minutes. Then we will close the public testimony. And if there are any questions by the hearing body, we will ask those. There will be a discussion and deliberation by the hearing body. No additional testimony unless specifically allowed by the chair. And a decision shall be made by the hearing body at the close of the hearing on the matter, or the matter will be continued to a date certain in the future. This will be the only notice of that date you will receive. Does anyone have any questions about the procedure outlining this hearing? No? All right, then we will proceed with the staff report.
Thank you, Vice Chair Boatman, and good evening, Commissioners. Up on the slide here, it's showing the location of the existing homes as a 1467 North Pine Street address. The area that's in the hatched is the location of about 9.14 acres. The little box there on the east side is an area that was annexed when this property was annexed not that long ago. It's not part of the subdivision, has a house on it. It's owned by the Vancouverines, and so that is not part of the subdivision application. There is development on 3 sides of residential development, low-density residential, and then to the north you have a R1.5 zone that is currently vacant. And this fronts on both Pine Street to the east side, which is considered a collector classification street, where all the internal streets that this subdivision will be local. And then we have a local street that's on the west edge that is partially there, but will be completed by this development to make it a full-width street, where it's only a half-width street today. This aerial shows you the 2 parcels, with this being the southern boundary right here, and then the northern boundary is up here. And here's Oak Street that's being extended along the western boundary to make it a full width, and then Pine Street along here. You can see there's an existing home that they've said down here, and they talk about accessory buildings and that being removed. It may include, I guess, these accessory buildings up here too. This is the Vancouverine home that is not part of the subdivision here. And you can see the rest of it is pretty much prior agricultural fields and such. The proposed subdivision is R1 low density. They've indicated in their application that all of the proposed lots, and I'll show you the plat here in a minute, comply with the zone lot size requirements of being between 7,000 and 10,000 square feet in size. There's two different tax lots that are part of this request. And there is, I think I'll wait and show you on the drawing here. They're calling this Hamilton Estates. And you can see the circulation pattern with the local streets. We have a connection to Pine Street of Northeast 15th Avenue that comes across and has your east-west connection over to Oak. Have a new street proposed, North Persimmon Street, and goes up to the northern boundary. And then 16th Avenue comes in, and if it wasn't for this tax lot that's not part, it would have gone over and connected to Pine, but because of that tax lot not participating, that was not possible. However, they have done this cul-de-sac in a way with its right-of-way boundary to touch this property boundary in enough of a distance here that if this should ever be redeveloped with more than the single house it has, they would be able to take access to this cul-de-sac rather than out to North Pine Street. And that's always considered to be desirable, to have as few accesses to the higher classification streets, because they're more of transferring traffic across town, so the fewer conflict points you have, the better. So that was a good design feature of this subdivision, we think, because it's very possible that this could redevelop sometime in the future. It likely would require removing the existing house because it's pretty much covering the center of the lot. There's also a pedestrian easement that shows out of this cul-de-sac so that you have a bike and ped 15-foot wide connection here. It wasn't clear with the application if the applicant had druthers on whether it become an easement, which would be maintained by a homeowners association, or whether it would end up being a separate tract identified on the final plat to be recorded and would be dedicated to the city for future care and maintenance. And we have done those 50-50 in town. There's a logic to the city taking them over. I think the city should be willing to do that if you feel like that's the best thing to do. And that if there's ever issues with the pavement surface or anything else, it is a requirement in the code that you make those connections, and so it is for public purposes. And so there is that logic for the city to maintain those over time. They can also be maintained by a homeowners association and just an access easement placed there. There's a dual pedestrian easement, or at least one adjacent to it. I'm not sure if it's supposed to be the full width or not, that falls over that same area and goes a little bit wider. So there will be utility connections through there as well. The other thing that I can point out, since we've got the layout here, you see the 41 lots. Here's lot 41 here being proposed. We have two flag lots here that, rather than lot 20 taking access out to North Pine, they're able to take access to a common 20-foot wide access easement that comes up to serve both lot 20 and 19. So we think of those as being flag lots. That's to help provide the most efficient subdivision pattern for the lot itself, for this tract of land, that sometimes you have to make use of those. Our code certainly provides the opportunity to do that when necessary, to provide the most efficient use of dividing the land up. The other thing I wanted to point out is lots 9 and 10. They do not have access internally to the local streets, so they will have access out to North Pine Street. There is a 100-foot driveway separation on a collector street, and so I'm not sure what these are, but I think their frontages are around or slightly less than 60 foot of frontage. So there is a possibility that the layout of the houses could result in driveways that are too close together than our standards. So they also could meet the standard if the driveways are on the opposite side of the lots, if you know, that one's to the south and one's to the north. And so if they lay them out that way, they would probably be okay. It's not prohibited to put driveways on a collector street. It's just preferable not to have them there. So with that driveway separation issue and the desire to lessen driveways, we could consider a shared driveway between those two lots. If you think the public benefit of limiting the amount of driveways is important enough, you could add that as a condition of approval. Staff did not go so far as to have it in our current conditions of approval, knowing that there is an option for them to lay out the houses in a way that their driveway would actually meet the 100-foot separation. So I wanted you to know about that. After the packet went out, we received a memorandum that we always get from our city engineer that is basically outlines the engineering standards that will be followed at the construction plan stage when they create the public improvement plans and such. There was one discrepancy that I noted in his comments that isn't represented in the proposed plat, and you probably can't read it here, but right down here there's a label here of what the pavement width is and the right-of-way width. And the right-of-way width is correct, proposing 30 foot of right-of-way from the center line. So that's going to mean dedicating some additional land along Pine Street that isn't dedicated yet on that final plat unrecorded. But they have a proposal here that indicates 18 foot of pavement from the center line. And the city engineer says we need 20 foot of street pavement from the center line to meet our transportation system plan collector road standard, so that we have adequate width for bike lanes on both sides of Pine Street. And I don't think that's going to be a problem for them to do, but I wanted you to be aware that, and for our record, that we're going to be asking for that at the construction stage, and I let the applicant know tonight here as well. So Pine Street is under the jurisdiction of Clackamas County. That doesn't necessarily need to complicate things in their design, but it certainly complicates the permitting process for the applicant greatly, because they have to go through both the city and the county. The county's requirements are pretty specific, and since their comments came in after the packet, I noticed that we are missing a condition of approval, and I would make it right next to condition number 3, where we talk about requiring the recommendations or comments from our city engineer. Right there, we should insert another condition of approval that requires us to include the comments, the recommended conditions of approval from Clackamas County. So I said something like, the development shall conform with the recommended conditions of approval provided by Clackamas County Department of Transportation and Development memorandum dated February 11, 2019. And they're also very specific on the permits that are required and how they do those, and talking about the same right-of-way issues that our city engineer talks about. There doesn't seem to be anything unusual in what they're indicating. It's something that we usually get from them at a construction plan preparation stage. I already mentioned the access easement for the Vancouvering property that's not a part, so that if it ever redevelops in the future, it would have access internally to this subdivision rather than out to Pine Street. The applicant provided, when we were laying out this subdivision, a future street plan that includes the vacant property to the north, so that we could see how it might tie in with this particular development and how that ties in with the property north of the vacant tract. And so you'll see how we have a plan for North Oak Street to continue all the way along and up to Territorial Road. And where we'll have another road going east-west, 17th Avenue, that would connect at Pine Street, where it actually connects into the North Redwood Landing subdivision that you approved not long ago, and it's well under construction now. And Persimmon Street connects up into that particular. So we end up with a fairly good grid-type street pattern, which is what our comprehensive plan says is the most desirable pattern, with a limitation on the use of cul-de-sacs. Only when necessary should you use those. So I think they've outlined a very good subdivision that we're looking at tonight, and shows how the property to the north could also be laid out in a manner that will provide us a good circulation pattern for the community. So we think the applicant's representative, the planner, did a good job in doing those type of layouts. All of the streets that are in this subdivision are meeting our normal city standard local street width standards, 34 foot of pavement, and I can't remember now, I think it's 52 feet of right-of-way. With that, I believe that a small sliver, maybe 2 foot of the 6 foot wide internal sidewalks on each side, will end up being on private property outside of that 52 foot right-of-way. It's the norm in Canby. It's not necessarily the norm in other communities. We often allow a portion of the sidewalk to slop over into the private property, but that does require on the final plat a pedestrian easement so that people have the right to walk on the private property. And the only practical difference it makes is applicant has to dedicate less total right-of-way, and it actually puts the sidewalk closer to the front doors of the home by 2 or so feet than if you had it all in the right-of-way. So physically, you'd feel like the sidewalk was a couple feet closer because it's in the setback area, because the setback is from a property line. So that's the practical difference that you see when that happens. The review criteria are in your staff report, and we basically went through the R1 low density requirements. And there will be street lights placed in the subdivision. They'll be responsible for that. We always look at that at the construction stage. Canby Utility helps plan out the spacing for the street lights and the standard that is normally used with the Cobra heads. I forget what height they're at, but I believe they are using LED lights all the time now when they erect those. And then we talked about the access limitations to Pine Street when possible on driveways and such, and they did a pretty good job of trying to maintain the access internal for that. And in our review of the application, we feel like they've met all of the subdivision application requirements that are applicable. And they also followed the necessary processing standards, holding their pre-application meeting and a neighborhood meeting to get where they are. They also produced a traffic study, and that was indicated in your staff report. There was a couple conditions that were associated with that, and I'm not remembering what they were right now. If you have a question about that, I can look those up. I think they're listed in the conditions of approval, number 4. Some of those traffic recommendations are right there in the conditions of approval. See if there's anything I've missed here. We talked about all of these items that meet the design standards already. And see if there's any, so with the conditions of approval then, remind you that I'm recommending that somewhere around condition number 3, before or after we insert that one with to follow the county's recommended conditions of approval. And on condition number 3, we do need to add the date of the city engineer's recommendations. It's not on here right now at the very end, dated February 4th, 2019. We put the condition in here but didn't have the memorandum yet and forgot to add the date since the packet went out before it came. See if there was anything else. And then we talked about if you feel like you need a shared driveway for lots 9 and 10 or not. That would be a condition that you would need to add. And we talked about the 2-foot sidewalk that's on the private lots. And we talked about the future access for the Vancouvering property. So I think I've covered everything. So based upon the application submitted and the facts and findings and conclusions of our report, staff does recommend approval of this subdivision subject to the conditions of approval and the one additional one and the modification with the date. Any questions about this application?
Jennifer?
I have a couple. On the lots 9 and 10 that are up there in the corner, is changing the 18-foot to 20-foot going to make those lots smaller than 7,000 square feet, or is it just an easement that won't matter?
No, I think that it's the paving is out in the right-of-way, and so it's not going to change the size of the lots in any
I
way.
wasn't sure if it would push the sidewalk
Yeah.
further or anything like that. And then the traffic studies that people are doing, since we're adding all of these new neighborhoods, are they taking them into consideration that, like the one last week or 2 weeks ago and this one and that, because that's all adding into it, but if it's something that's not currently happening, is it cumulative?
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
it really is cumulative, and that's been coming up enough that a few months ago, I asked our traffic engineers to actually do an extra task to go out and do new traffic counts when we don't have recent traffic counts for an adjacent street, so that they can demonstrate that we're on track with what the adopted transportation system plan projected, because it had a 20-year horizon, and we're getting close to that 20-year. And so are we on track for what it projected the traffic to be on streets with anticipated development in that 20-year time frame? And so a couple of the last traffic studies we've had have indicated that, hey, it was surprising how close the level of traffic was measured or predicted on the adjacent streets to a subdivision was following what's in a plan that was done 16, 17, 18 years ago. And then along with that really is cumulative in the transportation plan. And so they're also trying to do a task that basically does demonstrate that it's meeting that cumulative effect, because that is what the Planning Commission has been concerned about, is that we've got all these subdivisions and we're not accounting for it. But it's the TSP that really accounted for it. And if we measure the traffic and we're on track with what it said was going to happen, then yes, it's cumulative and we're taking it into account. So when Redwood Landing went in, and we specifically told them, study the nearby intersection of Redwood and Territorial, because the Planning Commission wants to put stop signs there. And they said there is absolutely no warrant for that. And they said, actually, if all of the Redwood concept plan was developed, it still wouldn't meet the warrants for a signal light, and that it's generally not a good idea to put stop signs if one street's traffic is way lower than what the other traffic street is. And I think it indicated that even with full development, Territorial would still have a lot more traffic than Redwood would have on it. So stoplights are not necessarily a good solution. Still a possibility, but you almost never can put a signal up if it doesn't meet the MUTDC warrant standards for doing a signal, because they can be more detrimental and they're so costly. I mean, they're $400,000, $500,000 to do a signal light. So that helps answer your question.
I was worried that we're going to have a domino effect surprise at some point, so
Yeah, we shouldn't.
glad to hear you're on it.
And since the transportation plan seems to be where we've tested it now recently, seems to be right on the ball. Because that's what's so important about the TSP when we do it, and it's such a major effort, is they predict, according to the zoning of the vacant property, what its highest reasonable best use would end up being, and they take that traffic into account, and then they do the modeling for the community as a whole based upon all those parcels being developed. And they project what that will be and what types of improvements do we need to individual streets and intersections to accommodate if all of those parcels are developed as we're expecting them to be. That's why it's also important when somebody proposes a rezoning that is not in accordance with the comprehensive plan, that we do a comp plan amendment with that rezoning, and then it gets really important to everybody, including the state, looks at it very closely. Friends of Oregon that is against various things that might harm housing supply or things like that, they get involved when you have a zoning that isn't in conformance with your comprehensive plan. And we have to do a lot more documentation when people propose that. But otherwise, the TSP tried to anticipate full development of every tract as it was intended to be zoned in accordance with the comp plan. That's how it works.
Commissioner Mills, you have a question?
Yeah, I've got three, actually, and I'll yield after each one in case there's other folks that want to speak also. The first one is regarding the Pine Street driveways, where we've talked about, suggested we either have a combined driveway or require them to split on opposite ends of the lots. Could we give them the flexibility to do either? I mean...
I think so.
Okay. That just seems like you could give them the flexibility to figure out the best way to do it.
Right.
Then I guess I'm not clear, because in the notes I see where they're not providing a solar easement. And my question to staff is, it seems like, that was not considered a critical issue. And I'm wondering, what the definition in terms in Canby's experience is for solar easement. Are we talking plots of land for panels? Are we talking solar access for house roofs to get, what is the concept that is normally associated with that?
Okay, so where did the solar easement come up?
It came up on page 30 in an applicant response on solar easements.
Oh, somebody at a neighborhood meeting or something?
Yes, in a
had brought
neighborhood
that
meeting,
up?
yes. And they said they would not be providing solar easements. So I ask that question because I think it's an important issue to be looking at for the future.
We used to have solar ordinance provisions, and they were all struck about 9 years ago from our code. The way they were written caused an enormous amount of difficulty on every single subdivision that came before the Planning Commission. And what we if I can remember right, because I was part of getting rid of them, is that they were written prior to this, the photovoltaic cells that are on the roofs and
Okay.
things. And so they were all about, instead of access to those on the roof, it was all about passive solar gain into the windows and trees not being blocking, or a house
Okay.
oriented on another lot. And so it was causing a need for all houses to face the long distance east-west, so they had the longest distance south, and that made it design of the street so you wouldn't have any north-south streets, or whatever it is, however that's oriented. Anyway, those were taken out of our code, so we don't have any requirements in the design and layout to address solar
Okay.
gain and such currently.
Thanks for that. One last question, and this is probably my most troubling question, and that is, when we talk about the easements for the sidewalks to protrude, I'm understanding 2 feet into the lots, and I'm seeing, lot line frontages between 50 and 150 feet on these lots, which means we're taking 100 to 150 square feet out, 100 to 300 square feet out of these lots. And then I look at these lots and they're all right at 7,000 feet with a few exceptions. So in effect, we're basically allowing 6,900 square foot lots to go in,
Well,
or an average like that, which seems to be in violation of the spirit of what the code is requiring.
so not really. I would disagree in that the sidewalk is in a 12-foot PUE, which they can't build in. It's in the setback area, 20 foot from the street, that they can't build in. So it's not taking up any buildable space for the lot. It's just physically placing the sidewalk 2 feet closer to the front door than if they had the wider right-of-way. If they had the wider right-of-way, they would have to have fewer lots, probably.
I understand that.
That's right, because they would have to be probably wider, because they wouldn't have the same depth to get the same design in.
But I guess I'm still left with the impression that they've skinned it really hard here, and they've taken, the houses are going to be closer to the streets as a result. There's less lot space usable to the owners. It doesn't feel real good to me, what they've done here. If I saw an average of 7,100 square feet and they were taking back the 2 feet, I'd probably be feeling a little bit better about it, because it would work out closer to what my understanding of the intended standard is. But the fact that they're right at 7,004, 7,001, 7,000 on multiple lots, and then they're taking 2 feet out of the front of them, doesn't feel good to me.
I can certainly understand that perspective. I still feel that they're meeting all of the width and size standards and taking advantage of the most efficient layout that they can do under the code and the provisions, and allowing a portion of the sidewalk on the lot doesn't really shrink the size of the lot. It doesn't change the fact they're still meeting the minimum frontage width, et cetera.
Okay. Thanks, Brian.
But it is true that if they put the entire sidewalks in the right-of-way, there would be 2 foot more right-of-way on each side, I guess. So what would it be, 56? Because I think it's proposed as 52. I can't read that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that all, Jeff? And on the driveways, Jeff brought up the share, leaving the option to them, then we wouldn't, because the code would require one or the other, we wouldn't really have to put a
No,
condition in,
I
would
think
we?
if you kind of think of Commissioner Mills, it probably wouldn't if you want to give them that option, because I think that's what staff would be doing, is that we wouldn't want to see house plans come in where the driveways won't meet our standard, So we're going to reject those house plans, and they're going to be forced to flip them. Or if they propose a common shared driveway, they can put any house plan they want.
Okay, that's what I wanted to be sure of. Yes.
On the driveway thing, since Pine is Clackamas County, don't they have different driveway separation requirements than we do?
Yeah, I think they're less than ours. It's a good point. I'm not 100% sure what their standards might be. They tend to acquiesce to most of the standards. I mean, we're doing their road pavement width is a minimum of 18 foot, and we're going to require 20 foot. Their right-of-way would actually be less than what we're asking for, which is 60 foot total. But they're going to be in charge of making sure that their drainage requirements and their paving thickness and those kind of things, and their permitting, and that they pay all of their fees to them for them to review those things. Yeah, I'm not quite sure if I answered your question or not, but.
Anybody else? Okay, then we'll go to the applicant. Please speak speak into the microphone, your name, address.
My name is Robert Price, that's Price. My address is 3935 Northeast 72nd Avenue in Portland. I'm here tonight on behalf of Icon Development and Construction. They are the sponsors, if you will, of this particular project. You know where this is, obviously. It's on the map up there. And again, Lot 3201 is not part of this development proposal, although they were part of the annexation back in 2018, last year. But they're not part of this proposal at all, so we don't address their issues or anything else. Again, a single-family dwelling exists on the property on the southern portion. That'd be tax lot 3200. And tax lot 3100 is on the north, and it has a horse barn on it. And as you can see from the photo, it's primarily just an urban agricultural piece. Some of the timber that's in the photo has been harvested. So the buildings will be removed. There you go. Not close enough. The buildings will be removed so that the property is perfectly clear, if you will, to do what they wish to do. The site is basically flat. It drains very gently to the east towards Pine Street. So that'll provide some protection to the properties to the west and to the south if they worry about drainage coming their way, as we had 2 weeks ago with Territorial Estates. 41 pretty similar lots, as Commissioner Mills noted. They range between 7,000 feet and 7,555 feet, and that's lot 21 down on the south corner. No, doesn't work. So lot 21 is the largest, and as Commissioner Mills said, there are a number of 7,000, 7,004, and so on and so forth square foot lots. So they're all pretty uniform in terms of their size. They have about a 500 square foot range of size. Lots 19 and 20 are indeed flag lots. Hey, this one works. 19 and 20 are flag lots coming right down here. Lot 20 has frontage on Pine Street, but they're not going to be allowed to take access on Pine Street. The frontage is going to be for address purposes only. So they will use the flag lot, which will be a shared driveway situation, very similar to what we would propose up here. Then we'll have, limited access on to Pine Street, which is good because it is a collector, as Brian said. This application meets all of the requirements of 1662 and 1664, which are your subdivision sections. Sanitary sewer, water, fire, all readily available. Storm drainage will be engineered by Bruce Goldson, civil engineer par excellence, if you will. And he will take care of the storm drainage throughout. A large part of the storm drainage on public streets will go to dry wells. Individual lots will be engineered to do one thing or another in terms of storm drainage. But they'll all be handled. They'll all be managed. Nothing's going to run out into the street or anything like that. Pine Street will have the improvements, which will include 20 feet of paving width rather than 18, as Brian talked about earlier. That's fine with us. We'll do 20. Not a problem. 15th, built through from Pine all the way through to Oak. And 16th comes from back over here, this development to the west, and it comes as far as the cul-de-sac. And as Brian said, the reason it doesn't go all the way through is because of lot 3201. So we've come up with an alternative. Got a little cul-de-sac there with a 15-foot ped bike path right here that will go through. And, I think it'll serve the purpose of access and connectivity to the greatest extent possible. Oak Street, from here all the way up to the top. And here's the sidewalk that ends up on lot 31. And the sidewalk will be in an easement so that lot 31 still has ownership of all that property. So the lot size of lot 31 is still 7,000 square feet, even with an easement across it. You'll see other developments from time to time, I'm sure, where you will have easements down a common property line like this. 5 or 6 feet on one side for water, 5 or 6 feet on the other side for sanitary. And, those are easements. The property still ends up in fee simple ownership of the lot owner. Persimmon, the new street, is going to go through here like this. Now at the end of both Oak and Persimmon, we're going to have some reserve strips. In other words, a 1-foot strip the city has ownership for. They'll put up a barricade perhaps, and you can't go through until the property to the north is developed and a street comes down to meet this, and then the reserve strip goes away and you've got a through street. Okay? So we've got it all kind of set up, if you will, so that the future access is there. When this property to the north develops, they'll take access off of Persimmon and Oak, and they'll probably use Pine as well. And they'll have another cross street coming across, what was it, Brian, 17th?
17th.
17th will come across up here. And the future street plan that he showed is probably the 90% of the plan you're going to see someday from somebody who wants to develop that property. And the future streets plan does kind of indicate all this, and we're comfortable with it. We're not in a development concept plan area, but we're in a development agreement area. And that doesn't cause any heartburn or problems for us. And again, a development agreement of some kind will be hammered out, and that'll be the end of the project, if you will, until development comes along. The traffic study by DKS indicates that there are no issues here, no problems, and Commissioner Trundy kind of raised that issue a little bit, and I can understand where you're coming from on, how do we get all these things to work together? But the transportation system plan of 16, 17 years ago that Brian discussed, hey, it's working. It's the planning is working out, and after 16 or 17 years, that can be a little unusual sometimes. 39 conditions, I guess 40 conditions now, when we add condition 3A, Brian, is that what you want to call it, is 3A, and then you don't have to change all the rest of the numbers?
I think we'll probably will end up changing the numbers, but we're just going to assert it in that area.
Yeah. What do I know? But we agree. We agree with all 39 or 40 of the conditions, whichever we've got here. We agree with those. We're comfortable with them. We're ready to move ahead with this project. And we request that you grant approval with all the conditions, and we'll be out of your hair. Any questions?
Any questions, commissioners?
The tract. This 15-foot ped bike path right here, that in the original plan was a tract that would go to the city, and that would be our preference that we do that. So that's shown as a tract and dedicated, at least to the ownership given to the city. On lots 9 and 10, if I can go back to that for a minute, we're open to either a shared driveway situation like right there, or individual driveways, one up the top down here and one down at the bottom there. They would be 100 feet apart. And this driveway here, right there, is 100 feet from the existing driveway for lot 3201. So either way will work. It's just, how many driveways do you want to put on a collector? And we're open to either, but I think the smart thing seems to be the shared driveway.
The frontage of that lot is 60 feet apiece?
Boy, my eyesight isn't that
Yeah, I
good,
couldn't
Commissioner,
read
but
them
I,
either.
Oh, 64?
64 and a half.
How wide do driveways have to be?
A minimum of 12 foot, a
So that's
maximum.
24 feet. So you
24
would
is
just barely
usually-
be able to, would you be able to fit 2 driveways in with that?
well, can't you build, a shared driveway actually isn't 2 driveways
Well,
adjacent
I
to
mean,
each other.
other than the shared, I mean, if you put them at the end of the
Oh,
lot.
I got you.
Might still just barely be too
Might.
close.
Might make it. I don't know, we'd have to do a little, Bruce would have to do a little design work to see what works best.
Right.
I think you probably measure them from the center line. So if you did, they.
Center line of
you'd have
the
enough.
driveway. Yeah, maybe.
Just
I don't think-
wondering.
I don't think it'll be a big issue, and it's certainly not an issue that'll kill this project, so.
Okay.
Vice Chair.
Any more questions?
Yeah, go ahead.
Is there a plan to put a crosswalk there at the pedestrian path over to 16th?
I don't think so.
Okay. I was
I
just
haven't-
curious, because having a driveway next to it.
Haven't heard any discussion
would
of
be
one.
weird.
Yeah, there was the traffic study that was done said that they felt that the primary crossing point across Pine would actually be at Northeast 15th Avenue. And that they did not feel like, from everything they tested the amount of pedestrian traffic that's out there today for the traffic study. They didn't think it would be enough to warrant a physical pedestrian crossing at this time. Wait till it's fully developed and there's other developments, and then reassess whether you want a crosswalk in this particular area somewhere. But they thought 15th would be a better place rather than 16th.
Anybody else? Thank you, Mr. Price. Are there any proponents for the project? Any opponents? That's his. Any neutral? Well, since there's nobody, we won't need a rebuttal. I'd like to close the public testimony, and if there are any questions by the hearing body? Okay.
I guess I'm curious, staff has said that the bike path question has gone 50-50 in the past. Sounds like the applicant's offering the tract.
Yeah, if
My
you-
gut says that's a better way to go, but I guess I'm interested
Yeah,
in
if you
your
think
opinion.
it's the best way to go, then to have it dedicated to the city. The only reason I talk the way I did is because city staff in various departments don't have 100% agreement on this. So that's why we just kind of leave it up in the air. And if you think it's preferable one way or the other, then you should probably make it, add it as a condition so that we know what to do.
Be
Then
curious
we're
what
not-
the other commissioners feel about that.
Yeah.
I'm in agreement with you, I think, of giving the track to the city.
I kind of think so too, because we got the alleyways all over our neighborhood, and once they're built, they're kind of ignored. And I'm not sure they
That
were-
is part of the problem. Some CCNRs actually expire, and they don't have any reason, and then they don't maintain what's supposedly a common easement. And so then the city's, well, it's not ours.
Well, I think that would be a good condition to add and help both the city and the residents, I think. I mean, the applicant and the residents.
So they install it. We just, in the long run,
Take
it'll
care
be
of it.
dedicated to us, and we'll take care of it.
Mr. Price, would you come to the microphone, please?
Robert Price, representing Icon. On that little pedestrian bike pathway there, if you folks don't want it for the city, if you don't want to take it for whatever reasons, and you want the developer to keep it, if you will, we'd prefer that it not be subject to an HOA. We would rather have it in the CCNRs for this development rather than controlled by an HOA. Okay? It'll be better for us, frankly, if we do it that way. So if you don't want it for the city, then, the developer will keep it and put it as part of the CCNRs for the entire development rather than as part of an HOA that sometimes works, sometimes doesn't.
But it's your client's preference that the city take
Correct.
possession?
That's correct. Yes,
I think that might be our preference too, to be honest with you.
you can have it.
I might just add, the issue comes up a lot because some subdivisions have common open space, entrance signs, various amenities that they need to maintain over time. And drainage is one of the major ones, but with use of dry wells for disposing of, then oftentimes it's not as important to have HOAs set up than when you have a surface detention pond and things like that. Dry wells do have maintenance over time, but not the same level of maintenance as a surface detention facility that some people choose to use.
An HOA is often set up to take care of, like Brian said, public areas and open space and stuff. We don't have that. We've just got this one pathway right there, and we're not really keen about having an HOA just to deal with a pathway.
I've got a question for Brian. What are the reasons why the city would want to or would not want to take on a tract? What are the disagreements with the various departments?
I
of the
think
city?
the main thing is just maintenance. It's not, in many people's eyes, such as the lead in the Parks Department, it's not really thought of as a park per se. And so it's spreading the city out to additional maintenance other than just the parks, and it tends to fall on the street department team rather than the Parks Department. So they're not that thrilled about having to remember that now they not only are taking care of streets, but to me it's a natural extension, but a bike and ped path that connects the streets, which is public.
How long is this thing again?
Probably
15 feet wide by,
Looks like 100 and
About 100 and
something
something.
feet, 105, 110. Looks,
Yeah, their vehicles can go down that pathway. They're built so that they can drive on them.
It's a little over 100 feet in length.
Did we close public?
You set
Well,
the policy,
we-
you helped set the policy for the city on this. Planning department thinks it's suitable to be city-owned because our ordinances require these connections, and they are for the public. So they're not much different than a public street.
Will there be some type of like a pylon or something at each end so that random people can't drive down it?
They do put
Okay.
ballards to keep cars and et cetera.
Okay.
And actually, one of the worst problems we've had with them is scooters and motorbikes going through them, and that really upsets the neighbors because it's at odd hours of the day or night, and you got this loud motorcycle using the pathways. So police have been after that, but it's a common problem, and the ballards don't stop them
Right.
because the bikes have to get through.
Will ballards be required?
Yeah, it'll be part of it. That level of detail we can take care of at the construction stage and have them install those, and then we maintain them.
Well, what I think is we don't want them to have to do a homeowners association. I mean, they don't want to. I don't blame them. I think if they're going to develop it and they turn it over to the city, I think the neighborhood will benefit, because if it's in a CCR, it would probably end up similar to my neighborhood, where they are kind of run down and the paving's not all the way through there, and flooding and dirt washes over them. You know, I mean, I'm in favor of it going to the city after the development.
I might mention that we do have an ordinance that's very specific on how fencing adjacent to a pedestrian pathway with residential lots on either side must be done. And so we strongly will request that the developer be responsible for the fencing on the two lots adjacent to this pathway, because if they aren't, it won't get done right. And it won't meet our code standards. And we hate to go after the individual homeowners if they're left to put up the fences, because they won't do it right.
Do you know what that code is?
Yeah, kind of. It's-
Good neighbor fence?
It's if you fence right on the edge of your property, it can only be 4 foot tall or not a screening fence. If you want it 6 foot chain link, you can do it, but if it's going to be screening, it can only be 4 foot tall. Then you can put your fence back further to put up a 6 foot tall screening fence.
Anything else? Thank you. Okay, do I have any motions?
Mr. Chair, I'll motion that we accept SUB 1806 Hamilton Acres with the conditions presented by the Planning Commission, and to include 3.5 or 3A, to include the recommendations and conditions from the Clackamas County, to add the date February 4th, 2019, and dedicated trail, the pedestrian bike path trail dedicated to the city, along with a shared driveway for lots 9 and 10.
Any seconds?
I'll second.
Discussion?
Go ahead, Mr. Mills.
Before we vote, I just want to, I'm going to vote for this, but I am also going to have a reservation about it. And it's not so much with this particular development, but it's with this, I'm going to feel like it's been, they've been nudging the standard on the lot size here, I feel. And I think that this is maybe a practice, and I'm a new guy, but I've got a problem with this. And so as time goes by, you're going to see me a little more resistant to this in the future. So just as you leave the meeting today, think about that.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? (18-06) Hamilton Acres passes. Items of interest from the, oh, we need the final decisions first, right, Ryan?
Yeah, we've got both A and B. We got two of them on here.
Okay, any motion for final final findings of SUB 18-05 Northeast Territorial Place Estates? Motion to approve.
Find that number.
18-05 Northeast Territorial Place Estates.
Mr. Chair, I move to approve the final findings of sub 1805 Northeast Territorial Place Estates.
I'll second that.
All approved?
Aye.
Aye. Nays? Okay, do I hear a motion for the final findings of SUB 18-06 Hamilton Acres final findings?
Mr. Chair, I'll move to approve sub 1806 Hamilton Acres final findings with the conditions stated previous.
I'll second.
All approved?
Aye.
Any nays? That's approved. Final findings of 18-06 Hamilton Acres, final findings are approved. Any items of interest from the planning staff?
No?
How about from the commission? Before we adjourn, I'm going to let you know we're going to take a 5-minute break, and then the planning commission will have a study session. It's open to whoever wants to stay. So I'm going to have a motion to adjourn.
I'll move.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion is approved. 5-minute break.